So, what we're talking about today is the difference between how your income is taxed when you're working as opposed to when you retire and you start drawing money on your investments to live on. And I get this question a lot about should I contribute to a Roth 401k or a traditional 401k? So, when you're working and you're contributing to a 401k, a traditional 401k, the money is coming out from the highest tax bracket you're in. So if you're in the 22% tax bracket and you contribute to a 401k, you're literally going to save 22% on every dollar you contribute to that 401k because you're not going to have to pay tax at 22% on that money. Now, you might be thinking, well, when I'm working, and even when I'm working or retired, both times I pay the effective tax rate. So the effective tax rate is a blend of all your tax brackets along the way. So your income starts here, and as you earn more and more money, you go up into a higher tax bracket. So if you start working in January and you make 401k, traditional 401k contributions in January, you're still probably down here in the zero tax bracket because you haven't earned that much money yet this year. And once you go above the standard deduction, then you go up into the 10% and 12% bracket. But that's not how it works. Even if you're contributing money in January, the money is coming out of the highest tax bracket that you hit that year while you're working. So if you're in the 22% tax bracket, you're literally going to save 22% because the money for the traditional 401k is coming out of your gross income and it's avoiding the highest tax rate that you're going to hit that year. Now, if you're contributing to Roth, you're going to pay that 22% on the money and contribute to the Roth after tax, and the money is going to grow tax free for the rest of your life. So I tell people maybe while you're younger, typically when you're younger in your 20s and 30s, you might not have as high an income as you will later in your career. And so contribute to the Roth when you're in your 20s and 30s if you have a lower income, because maybe you're only in the 12% tax bracket or 10% tax bracket. Well, it's worth it to pay those taxes up front and get into a Roth and have tax-free growth for the next 30, 40, 50, 60 years of your life, tax-free growth and tax-free withdrawals. That's great. But when you're in your 50s and 60s, later in life, you have a much higher income. Maybe you're not in the 22% bracket. Maybe you're in the 32% bracket. So every dollar you put into a traditional IRA, you're saving 32 or 35 or 37% because you're in a very high tax bracket. Now, I just looked at a client that was in recently, and they have 1.5 million in their IRA, traditional IRA. So any money that they take out is fully taxed. When they first came to me, they had made a mistake. One of the two of them had turned on their Social Security. And so because of that, we had to go in and correct that. And there's a way to do it. But once we corrected that for them and got that straightened out, we were able to take money out of the IRA at a much lower tax rate. Because when you turn your Social Security on, what actually happens is this 22% bracket. A lot of people fall into the 12% bracket in retirement because the top of the 12% tax bracket this year for 2026, it changes every year. But for 2026, if a couple has no other income, they're both 65 years old, the top of the 12% tax bracket is about $148,000 a year. So that's over 10,000 a month of income. 10,000 a month is 120 a year. So if your income is 120 a year in retirement, you're in the 12% tax bracket. But what ends up happening is if you turn on Social Security is taxed differently. So once you turn on Social Security, it actually not in reality, but what actually ends up happening is the 22% bracket comes back into the 12 bracket. And so you hit the 22% bracket maybe here or here. You hit it much quicker than if your Social Security was turned off. So this couple, 1.5 million in IRAs, their total income this year was 134,000. They have a small pension, No Social Security this year. So a majority of that 134,000 came out of their IRA. And what was their tax rate? Well, their total tax that they paid on all their income, 134,000, was $12,036. That was their total tax that they paid. And what tax rate is that? Well, their effective tax rate was 8.96%. So you might be wondering, if I'm working now and I'm contributing to my traditional IRA, and when I'm in retirement, how much tax am I going to pay? Well, here's an example. Of course, it's only for this year, but this couple, 1.5 million in IRAs, their income this year 134,000. Only about 20,000 of that was pensions, and their total tax was 12,036, and their effective tax rate 8.96%, less than 10% they paid. That's a good trade off. When I can save while I'm working 22%, and when I'm retired, I pay the effective tax rate, which is the blend of the 0% tax rate, the 10% tax rate, the 12% tax rate. It's a blend of all those rates, and it's less than 10%. That's a good trade off. In finance, we have a fancy word for that. We call it arbitrage, when we can save 22% on taxes and then take it out later and pay less than 10%. That's a great trade off. So Roth Roth is great when you're younger and you have a lot of time to let it grow, but when you're in your 50s and 60s, you may want to think about doing more traditional IRA, because the tax benefit could be crucial.